tonight. One of our, I'd say in the top three folks here, so bear with us as we squeeze everybody in tonight. It's me great pleasure to introduce two collaborating researchers who are working on ravens, Dr. John Marzluff, University of Washington, and Dr. Matthias Loretto, say it right, from the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Germany. And I'll let them tell you a little bit more details about themselves. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for coming out tonight and for staying awake, because I know a lot of you were up as early as we were this morning, as I saw you out there. So I appreciate that, and we'll try to keep you awake at least for the next hour. But we're going to split this up kind of into two parts. I'm going to give a general introduction about ravens, a little bit about their behavior, and a little bit about their association with wolves that Dan and others in the park have done over the years. And then Matthias will take over and really show some of the new things that we've been discovering just this last month, that we've been tagging these birds and getting to know them and getting to know their territory a bit in detail. And then we're glad to answer any questions you guys have about ravens or their association or with wolves or the technologies that Matthias will tell you about as well. But I'm a professor of wildlife science at the University of Washington. I came to Gardiner first, I think it was 43 years ago. And I remember that because the guy I was with, we were camping in the Mammoth Campground, and he was so cold that he spent the whole night in the bathroom there pushing the hand warmer heater. He didn't know about sleeping on an insulite pad, which I guess you don't sleep on anymore either, but we did back then. So I was so nice to be back here. I've been bringing a class here the last 20 plus years, and over spring break, and we'll do that again. And now to really be doing some research here has been for me really kind of a dream come true. So it's a pleasure to tell you about some of that work here tonight. But just in general with ravens and wolves and how they associate, in art you see these associations drawn a lot, like Van Zyle's painting here, showing the tight collaboration between ravens and wolves. There have been some observations, like from Meach's work, that really suggests that ravens are very dependent upon wolves, maybe completely dependent, as he says here on Isle Royale, at least in the wintertime, for some of their foods. That's probably not the case here. As you'll see, there's other food resources around, but they certainly follow wolves, and they certainly benefit from the leavings of wolves' kills. There's some speculations in the literature as well about even a tighter relationship, and some of this is backed up with data, some of it with more ideas. But for example, the first couple up here from Barry Lopez's writing suggests that ravens may lead wolves to their prey. They certainly play around with them a lot and interact as pups, young ravens and pups. And they basically are revered in lots of early writings, Inuit writings, or other northern people's writings about how important the wolf was because it provided so much for the rest of the community, and probably including the people that were scavenging, as well as things like ravens and foxes were scavenging from their kills at one point. And then some work that Dan and others reported here, where they actually saw ravens being quick to locate and harass injured elk, which suggests, again, maybe as a cue for wolves to go after those, at least incidentally, even if not, certainly not purposely, but incidentally by their actions, might attract the attention of wolves. And those are some of the things that Matthias and I have been interested in really trying to tease apart with more high-tech look and more continuous observation of these animals. So again, art showing these animals with wolves or coyotes and ravens interacting a lot. So I want to give you a little bit broader perspective on ravens, where they came from, how they've evolved over time to give us the birds we're looking at here. And it's important to think back to the Pleistocene, basically, to really get the full story of how ravens came to North America and how they continue to evolve here now. So as I'm sure you're well aware, there was a large land connection between the Old World and New World across the Bering Strait, Beringia, that animals lived on. They didn't just walk across this narrow bridge. It was a large habitat that they inhabited, And as the ocean depths increased or decreased, that was more or less available habitat. When it was available in the Pleistocene times, it was steppe, kind of shrub steppe like we have here with some coniferous forest, and that allowed ravens to inhabit that area. When it flooded, ravens were separated on either side, some in the old world where they originated, some in the new world where they were perhaps evolving a bit differently. So if we take a look at that, we had that divergence initially between old and new world ravens about 2 million years ago, when there was a disconnect between the old and new world. Ravens were whole Arctic. They still occur whole Arctically around the world, but there was no interchange of old world ravens with new world ravens 2 million years ago. Prior to that, ravens had started their evolution in Africa. They moved into the old world, and they diverged basically into the species that we call the common raven today. And about 650,000 years ago, some of those common ravens were isolated in the Canary Islands and form a distinct species. 2 million years ago, as I said, when there was a connection between old and new world, ravens came to the new world across Beringia, so coming this way. And about 1 million years ago, some of those became isolated in the desert environments and evolved the Chihuahuan raven. So that's a species we still have today, and maybe some of you have seen that bird down in New Mexico or even Arizona or into the Midwest. So the Chihuahuan raven and the Canary Island raven were these first divergences from that common raven stock. But you can imagine their situation would be a little different in the new world than the old world for ravens. And during that 2 million years that they were separated, they began to diverge. And in fact, you can see signals of that divergence in their DNA today. This little pie chart shows that there are light and dark genotypes of ravens, very distinct, so distinct they're genetically more different than the common raven is from the Chihuahuan raven today, which we recognize as fully distinct species. We were surprised when we did these samples that they were so distinct genetically. And yet they occur in some of the same places. In Washington, in Idaho, and in California, you have both of these clades or these genetic types of ravens. We haven't looked at samples from here, but I would bet there's a mixture here as well. So the idea is that the black circles are this are the more recent invasion of ravens into the New World, and the open circles are the original invasion 2 million years ago. So if you look in California and in parts of the Rockies, you can see some of this old DNA basically that suggests these ravens came, or their ancestors came some 2 million years ago and were diverging from old world ravens at that time. But if you look at places where we catch them now, we see much more similarity between the ravens in places like Alaska and the Old World in Europe. And that suggests that those ravens came across from the Old World much more recently, probably about 15,000 years ago, again, during the Pleistocene when there was a connection, a land bridge connection between the two parts of the globe. So what we had was two invasions of ravens, one 2 million years ago, one about 15,000 years ago, and we can see that difference in their DNA today. But they're not diverging into different species like happened on the Canary Islands or that happened in the Chihuahuan Desert. Instead, these two lineages or genetic types are becoming more similar through time because they're interbreeding. We would catch birds in Washington, and individuals would be paired, breeding together, one from the old world lineage, one from the more recent invading lineage. So there's no separation from as far as ravens are concerned that these are different types, even though genetically we really thought they may very well be. So I just bring this up because it's an interesting contrast with how speciation usually occurs, where you get lineages diverging through time as they're experiencing different conditions. These are experiencing the same conditions and they're becoming more similar through time. And so what we're seeing is possibly an example of speciation in reverse, as these animals are becoming more and more similar. That's probably more than you wanted to know about raven genetics at that point. This is more interesting and more relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight, and that is the accumulation of ravens at a carcass. So I'm sure many of you have taken a dead cow and put it in your backyard and watched the occurrence of ravens. And if you did, you'd see what's in the black dots here. And what you see is that initially there's no ravens or just a few, then the numbers build up slowly, and then they really rise, and you get a large number of ravens that come in and finish the cow off, Then they leave as the cow is eaten. You see the same thing with the bison. That might be a more appropriate thing to put in your yard here. But this idea and how this occurred and why it occurred was suggested by Bernd Heinrich, who I'm sure some of you have read some of his writings, but both Matthias and I have connections with Bernd, and he's been involved in this project as well. And I did my postdoc with him many years ago. And we were trying to understand how this happened. So I just want to explain this process to you a bit. And in the meantime, you'll see the kind of social fabric of ravens as well. So we looked for several years at ravens in captivity and in the wild. We had many individuals tagged. We did lots of different experiments. We followed them around to understand how they accumulated a food source and why they should do that. And what we found first off is that if you're a dominant or subordinate raven, your access to food is quite different. If you're a dominant raven, and there's a lot of individuals around, here's 17 or 20 individuals, a dominant raven is going to eat almost all of the sampling period we observed, almost all of the 5-minute period here. If you're a subordinate, you're lucky to get in and eat for maybe 20% of the time that you're around that food. So when you watch ravens here, you often see a big group around food. Some are standing right on the food and just eating and getting everything they want. Those are dominant birds. Other birds are standing around the side, shuffling around. Their heads are fuzzy. They're trying to get food. They don't get in very often. Those are subordinates. And if you think about the decisions they have to make to join a group or to strike out on their own, it could vary a lot if you're dominant or subordinate. If you're dominant, there's not much reason to leave. You've got all the food you need there. If you're subordinate, you're probably going to leave pretty quickly and try to find food on your own. So when we talk about some of the travels of these birds, that could be very important. The other thing is that these are all non-breeders that we're showing here. Breeding birds are dominant to all these non-breeders, and they have access to food whenever they want. But if you're a non-breeder, if you're the only one at a food source, you don't get to eat. The dominant birds, the territorial birds of that place will keep you out of that food. And it's not until you get 9 or 10 individuals there that you really start getting access to that food, especially if you're a dominant individual. So that's part of the impetus for why the numbers build up through time. Because when there's only a few there, those individuals can't eat. So they should do things to attract others in there so that they can eat. And they do that often at the roost. So they'll make a lot of noise around the food, and that can attract some, but then they go to roost, and in the cases in Maine where we studied this, they roost in these groves of conifers. And they spend the night there in groups, these birds that are non-breeders, and they accumulate there, and they go as a group in the morning to some of these new food sources to overpower the territory owners so that they can all eat. So just to schematically draw it out for you, in this case, let's replace the moose with a bison. If a bison dies on your territory, the territorial pair there is going to eat, and they're going to be very quiet, and they're going to keep that food to themselves as long as they can. Eventually, some other birds are going to come by and see it, and they're going to be maybe subordinates that are hungry, and they're going to try to get in there. They're going to try to get food from those adults. The adults are going to attack them. Those young are going to cry. They're going to beg. They're going to yell, make all kinds of noise that incidentally attracts others in. Till you get a relatively large group, and individuals back at the roost even expand that group more. So individuals that might know where food is at night that are roosting with others who don't. Those that know simply go to where the food is. Those that don't just follow those who do. And they end up at that food source in a larger group that leads to that large jump in numbers of birds just overnight. That's the situation in northern forest, where food is hard to find by looking for it. Here in the more open Yellowstone area or in Idaho where I studied this, that's probably not exactly the case. They don't really need to go back to the roost and get others to come in. They can just make noise and commotion during the day and probably attract a lot of others into that food. So again, that's something we're looking at to see the difference. And they also soar around their roost sites to attract even more and more birds in to the group there. And again, whether they do that here or not is something to be discovered. The other thing we saw in studies in Washington is that ravens often make long forays off of their territory. So this is just one individual, a female, who basically lived on this territory, the dark area here, and she made excursions out to food sources, a prison that had a lot of food left out, and a dump area in Forks, Washington, out on the Olympic Peninsula, for those of you who know that. So these long excursions are made, but then she lost her mate, and then she started traveling even farther to these areas and ended up getting a new mate and settling back on a territory adjacent to her previous one. So they mate for life. These territorial birds can make excursions out of their territory to find food or to go to known food places, or even to obtain a new mate when their mate dies. But for the most part, they stay on a pretty fixed territory, and it's those young birds that are recruiting and coming into the carcasses to overpower these guys that are the ones that are probably moving around a lot more. And then finally, some information from here, from what we knew before we started our work here, from Wilmer's work. We know that ravens not only rely upon wolves, the open areas here, but here's ravens, so the open areas, how much food they get in biomass from wolves versus how much they get from hunters. So hunters, about 10 times or more amount of food is provided to ravens than wolves were providing to ravens during this study, which was early in the wolf reintroduction. So again, it's not just wolves and ravens here, it's wolves, ravens, and hunters at least. And we know from Dan Staler's work that ravens follow wolves around quite a bit, regardless of what they're doing. So here are different activities of wolves: traveling, resting, mousing, and at a kill site, for example. And ravens are with them almost 90% of the time. And when you see a wolf, there's a 90% chance that you'll see a raven with it, especially if they're at the kill site or actually hunting, in this case for mice. But basically, almost all the time that occurs, there's a raven nearby. Not so with coyotes, for example, or elk. So they do key in on hunters, they do key in on wolves, and they basically follow and immediately come to aggregate at a wolf kill once it's made. So Dan spent a lot of time putting out just experimental carcasses. I imagine it's like what Matthias and I have been doing, putting out a dead elk here or a dead deer there and seeing what happens. And it takes a long time for ravens to find those versus to find a wolf-killed carcass. I should use this, sorry, Jim. And then after it happens, during the first hour, you get recruitment of about 15 birds on average to that wolf-killed carcass. And that suggests not something from the roost, right? I mean, that happened in the first hour after it was killed, where you get those individuals, and that would be something we call local enhancement. Or maybe it's a structured group that's following the wolves, but that's not typically what ravens do. So local enhancement to the noise and activity attracts that first group in. And then some things affect how many ravens are around wolves. For example, in terms of how much food is available, the size of the wolf pack makes a big difference. If it's a very small pack or a very big pack, there's not so much food available. Either they don't kill it as much or they eat it all when they do, versus an intermediate size pack. So in terms of, if you're a raven here, you probably aren't going to fare too well following the junction butte pack around now, for example, because there's a lot of them. And once they kill something, it's gone pretty quickly. And as temperature varies, or the severity of the winter, in milder winters, wolves consume more of their food when they kill it, and there'll be less for ravens. So we might expect annual differences and differences in how ravens associate with different packs. And then when I've been bringing my classes here, for several years we counted ravens in the park, all on one day in March. We counted them along the BBS routes on the roads, at wolf kills, here in town and in Mammoth, and at bison carcasses. And again, I just point out there's a lot of variability from year to year on how many ravens we would see, from basically threefold, 100 in some years to 350 in other years. So there's a lot of variability here, and that might be affected by weather and things like that. And in fact, what we found is that the number of ravens in town here in Gardiner versus in the park around wolves varied with respect to the snowpack and how much food wolves were providing. So with respect to snowpack, in human areas, the more snow, the more ravens were here in Gardiner. So you're probably due for a raven invasion this year. And in terms of biomass provided by wolves, as you'd expect, the more that they provided, the more the ravens stayed out in the, on the northern range and associated with the wolves there. And if we backtrack then, these are the years we did our study here. If you backtrack to before wolves were reintroduced, or shortly thereafter, you basically see that having wolves in the park has reduced the variability that we'd expect in the number of ravens. Earlier on, there was lots of variability with few ravens in the park and many going out and exploding into human areas and then not being there the next year, and then a whole bunch, and that was probably driven by weather extremes. But now, with the balance of having resources in the park by wolves and outside the park by people, that variability in raven numbers has, in our modeling here, it would have been dampened. So, with that kind of background, Matthias and I were interested in how these ravens are really associating with wolves today and how that varies with use of human resources and how that's influenced by weather, the status of the individual ravens, and all of those sorts of things, the pack size, those sorts of variables that I just talked about. So we had two basic objectives: measure the relative use by ravens of wolf-provided foods versus anthropogenic foods and relate that to a variety of attributes. And then two, determine how they exploit wolves. Is it that individuals are following particular wolves? They have their wolf versus somebody else, some other raven's wolf, or is it a free-for-all out there, basically? And to do this, we tagged a few birds last year. Just as a pilot study, we used kind of relatively old-fashioned tags. Matthias will update you on the kind we're using now, but ones that just log the position of the bird on a GPS and store it, and then we're able to download that data. And what we found is that these birds cover a lot of ground. I don't want to go into detail because we'll show you the new data, but basically the white area is the area covered by one bird in just a few months. It amounted to 400 square miles, and it covered two different wolf packs. The symbols on there are different wolf kills that were made during that time that bird exploited some of those. But in terms of other areas, it's a big area that they're covering. A lot more ground they're covering than we have known from Washington or from Europe. So we basically were interested in tagging a lot of birds and understanding how they might use this resource here and the landscape here, how the details in which they'd cover that big ground. So Bob was kind enough to happen to be on the scene yesterday when we were out trying to catch some birds at Blacktail Ponds, and made a little video of that capture. So we want to tell you a little bit about the methods we're doing. So I'll show you this quickly. You'll see how we catch the birds. We use what's called a net launcher. It throws a net over the top of them, as you'll see, in slow motion. And then Matthias will take it over and talk about some of the technology that we're putting on the birds to see that. So hopefully this will go with this. Yeah. So there's three birds at this Bison Head that was pulled out of the ponds by the wolves. And our net launcher is right here. Shoot it off. And 2 out of 3 is not bad in our world. So I just wanted to point out with that, the two birds we caught, one was a very dominant bird that was right on top of the carcass. One was a subordinate that was in and around, and one of them was lucky and flew to the right instead of the left. Matthias. I'll switch this while you show now.
So I started explaining a bit about the technology, as John mentioned. So this is now the tags we use this year. So these are the little backpacks they get. This is a harness. It's a special material made of Teflon. And this has the advantage that it doesn't rub. So it's very slippery. At the same time, it's really hard to cut. So a raven beak has a hard time to get through this. So this is really important to make the tag raven safe. Another important aspect was when I got 60 of these tags, I tested one with captive ravens in Austria, and they broke off one of these antennas. So what I did then was on 60 tags, I put 9 shrinking tubes on each of the tags on them to make them, to stabilize them. And so far it works. So far none of the birds here. So we tagged 49. None of them removed the antennas. And these antennas are very important to get the data. So what this tag has in it is a normal GPS, like a normal GPS device, or our mobile phones that can measure the GPS position. And then of course we need to get this data. And the 2 short antennas, they allow to communicate via the cell network. So we can upload new settings, we can change the settings all the time, and we can download the data via cell phone. Like if you go to the park or somewhere you use internet, this is the same system. So there's also a SIM card in this tag. The problem with this is, like, if you go to the park and you try to call someone or you try to use internet, yeah, you're laughing already. Most of the time it doesn't work. It works surprisingly well for the ravens because they fly. So next time try to fly and then it works better. But we have also a backup solution, which is the long antenna. And the long antenna allows us, if we are in a certain range to the bird, to directly download the data. And for this we use this device. This is a base station. So whenever a bird passes by, usually I have this switched on in the car, I drive through the park, and whenever there's a bird somewhere close, it makes a beep. Each GPS tag has a certain number. The number appears here and downloads the data, ideally. It also works from the plane. Dan already tried it a few times. It really works nicely from there. And then for longer range, we have this antenna. So we can connect this and also get data over, ideally, up to some kilometers distance. And the GPS tag. So these GPS tags at the moment provides data about like every half an hour. If the battery is not so high anymore, only every hour. How does the battery work? We have here a solar panel. So this is really nice because this means it works long term. In Europe we have, with the same tags, my colleagues detect some storks, white storks, and they works in 7 years. And in summer they get sometimes data every second. So they can really study, colleagues in my departments, they study the flight's behavior, especially soaring and the migratory behavior. So they get very high resolution. In winter it doesn't work so well. We'd have less sunlight. The days are shorter. So at the moment, as I said, we get data every half an hour up to every hour. I will show you later an example. Sometimes if the battery is fully charged, I can get more data. So in one case I will show you later, I got a nice track every 5 minutes, a GPS position. In addition to that, there's other sensors in this. One is something which measures the acceleration. So every 15 minutes, the whole day, it briefly switches on and measures the acceleration of the birds in three dimensions. That means we get a lot of numbers, but from these numbers afterwards we can get some information about the behavior of the bird. So imagine a bird is soaring. So the change in the acceleration or in the speed is changing to the front, so in this axis. But if it's really soaring, it doesn't change much up and down or left or right. If a bird is active flying, so flapping, it's more like this pattern. If it's resting, nothing changes. So there's different behaviors we can detect from that. And also we can then translate this in kind of energy consumption. So if we would find different strategies, some birds might fly more than others, as you will see, we can get some estimation for how much energy does each strategy require for this individual. Yeah, and with this I think I will jump into the data. I will later go back briefly to a presentation mode, but here I thought I show it you in an interactive way, which is the program. I just used the program Google Earth, showing you the GPS track. So this is like really kind of the everyday stories we can see. And I show you the first bird. So we have here Gardiner, and this is a bird we captured on Catland. And this is, John showed before an example from around Seattle. And this is a very similar situation. This is a territorial bird. This is really what we expected. It doesn't move too much. It has a typical pattern in this area. So this is the GPS track over, well, we can see it, 30th of October to yesterday. And there is some little excursions. I can also show you the points. So we don't measure the track continuously, but these would be the GPS points. And they are usually half an hour apart from each other. Only at night it shuts down, because at night they don't move. And so the lines in between, they're interpolations. So we don't know exactly whether the line was straight. It could be a little bit different, but within half an hour the birds, well, probably wouldn't go too far away from that line. As a next I will show you another example. For this I want to move down to Hayden Valley. So I'm sure you're familiar with this area, Mud Volcano. And let's have a look here. I show you the points. This is again a territorial male. We captured it, interestingly, in Canyon Village. And then the next day we moved down to Mud Volcano and wanted to trap the territorial male there. And it was already tagged. It went in front of the net gun, so John saw it and he couldn't believe. He was running to the car to get the trigger to trigger it, and then he saw it's tagged.
After sitting there for like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Hoping for the bird.
And it's also interesting, this is the night roost. So usually this is where it spends the night. In the morning it gets up, goes down to the parking area, checking out where some tourists dropped something, accidentally or not. And since the roads are closed since quite a while, it started doing something else. As you see, there's many lines up there. So it started moving a bit. And to see the full movements, we need to zoom out a lot. So basically what this bird does, and we were really surprised, almost every day it goes from Mud Volcano to Gardiner and back again. And this started, so we tagged it end of October. About this time, the roads closed, so there was no food source from tourists anymore. And pretty much at the same time, the hunting season here started, which means a lot of gut piles. And this is what the bird is using. Not only, sometimes it goes to the sewage pond, or even outside to Paradise Valley, which is up here. And we were really surprised by this frequent movement. And this is per day. I think the distance here is about 30 miles. One way.
And he's roosting back down there?
Yeah, usually he goes home to sleep there. And we think that it seems to be really important for them to show presence in the territory, because if this bird would leave for longer, probably someone else would take over. And if you imagine when they raise the chicks, the tourists are back at that time. So the food source is back, and then this is a very good spot. And especially during chick raising, that's the moment where they need most of the food.
So can I ask, are you saying that this is like the old begging bears? It's following human food, not so much wolf activity?
In this case, yes.
At least now, maybe now that the hunting season has ended, we're super curious to see now what he's going to do.
What's interesting about the hunting season, so a sewage pond is very predictable, or the garbage dump. So they really know there is food at this location. The hunting season is not, it's somehow predictable. It's, let's say, this area, and there's somewhere a gut pile, but not necessarily every day, and they don't know the exact location of it. So there's a little bit of difference. Maybe this is more similar to a wolf pack, because a wolf pack is also usually in a certain area, and there is somewhere a kill. They don't know where exactly, but somewhere in the area there will be likely a kill in the next days. But let's go to another example, which is, so we caught about 10 days ago, we caught a bird in lake. So we had permit, we could go there. It was like one of the last days where we could go down there on the road. And this bird, interestingly, first went up to Gardiner. So it's even a little bit further. went back on the same day, and then even more surprising, a few days later it decided, I show you just the points, it decided to go to Cody. But after this long trip it decided to stay there overnight and come back the next day. And then I was curious, I've never been to Cody, I don't know the area so well. So I was zooming in and I thought like, what is the bird doing there? So let's zoom in more and more, and there's already some structure. And then I saw the name of the street, Cody Landfill Road. So it's really surprising they really know where to get food. And then well, I'll show you another example. So this was so far a lot about anthropogenic food sources. The next bird is one we caught in Cook City. And first I thought, yeah, maybe this bird is a bit boring because it's in Cook City, it probably will stay there and won't do much more. But apparently it does much more. So it still spends some time in Cook City, but it moves a lot. So this is quite some exploration trips in this area. Here you see the points. And what was really surprising to me was this here and this here. So first let's zoom in to this point. So you see it hardly goes into the direction of Soda Butte. Well, here we are, Soda Butte, Lamar Valley, Tower. So it hardly goes there, only 2 times. And let's have a look on the first time when it went there. So this is Soda Butte here. And let's check the date. I can see here it was the 9th of November. Anybody knows what happened there by any chance? I'm sure some people from the room were there. So it came there at lunchtime, of course for having lunch, and in the morning of that day there was a wolf kill of the Junction Butte pack. And by lunchtime the bird from Cook City kind of apparently knew about it, and went all the way down there to have a nice lunch on a dead elk. And as you see from the points, it pretty much, it went really straight forward. So it's not like this big exploration loop. It was like it started here at 12, and I think at 1:30 it was down here. And then the second trip to... Well, I think the second trip is even more surprising. So you see it went all the way here to Tower. And this was... Let's see the date. So it spent quite some hours, several hours at Tower. It was the 18th of November. It got there again at lunchtime. And in the morning of this day, the Junction Butte pack killed the bison at Tower. So again, it's really surprising how the birds found this out within a few hours.
We're on Twitter and Facebook. We're not on Instagram, so we figure it must be on Instagram.
Okay, now let's switch a little bit the area. We can go to Old Faithful. So we captured a few birds there, 3 in total. We're not there. Here. And so the next 2 examples are birds which are non-breeders. They're vagrants, so they don't have a permanent territory. So far the examples, most of them, they're very likely breeders. So they stay usually in their territory, but apparently the boundary of the territory is not so strict for them. So they do much more, which was surprising for us. But now I show you 2 examples. In this case, this was a juvenile bird captured at Old Faithful. And on the same day, it decided to move to Island Park and spend there a few days. But I guess... I've never been there. I guess there's normally in summer quite some visitors, but also now this time of the year it's going down, there's probably not much food anymore. So it decided to go further south, and now it spends most of the time between Jackson and Idaho Falls. So it's moving a lot still in this area, but most of the time down here.
Doesn't that use a massive amount of energy?
That's what we wonder, yeah.
I mean, there's only, you don't like glide and soar so much.
They are good in soaring. They're not as well adapted as other bird species in soaring, but still they use thermals and orographic uplifts.
But even with that, the energetics of flight,
Yeah.
it really costs when you take off and when you land.
Yeah.
When you're actually flying, it's very efficient. The power dips way down during that sort of flight.
Especially
And
do you look at the winds at the same time?
you could, I mean, that would definitely make a big difference.
Yeah.
And some of
Yeah.
these other passive ways they can use winds, but flight is really a energetically inexpensive way to travel big distances. We think of it as impossible because we can't do it, but it's actually very efficient.
And then
But
if you
that's one thing we'll
If
calculate.
you fortuitously find something to eat, even better, right?
Yep.
That's the idea.
I don't know how fortuitous it is on some of those movements. They really know where they're going, it seems. Now this bird is his first year, so
It shouldn't know much.
it shouldn't know much.
What about weather in this year? It got so cold earlier,
Yeah,
so they're not stopping between spots.
could very well have made them
Weather
leave the
temperature.
interior of the park much more, much more abruptly,
Yeah.
and just they couldn't stay there, even though there might have been a little food. Given the temperature, it wasn't enough. So yeah, that it could certainly vary from year
Yeah.
to year. That would be
So for example, end of October it was very cold, and we were trapping several days at the sewage pond of Canyon Village, a lovely place. And then the sewage ponds were freezing. So there was ice, it was covered with ice, and there was no food anymore for
Yeah.
them.
What is the lifespan?
The lifespan? In the wild, it can be 15 to 20 years, sometimes maybe even more.
And we don't know how old a lot of these birds are. Like this one we do, but from plumage and mouth coloration, we can only tell the first couple of years. Then it's like, well, they could be 3 or they could be 30. We have one, the one we do know that we just tagged. It was 13 years old because it was banded 13 years ago down in Jackson. And she's breeding up on the Yellowstone picnic area.
What age do they typically become breeders and settle in a territory?
I always thought it was 3, but Matthias, he's taught me a lot on this respect. So tell
Yeah,
us.
so before I came here, I worked a lot since 2011 in Austria, and in the Alps we have non-breeders which are 15 years old. So I think this is more like the exception, but many of them would be 7, 8, 10 years old. It might be a special situation, so I think that the Alps are pretty covered with, or the good territories are already occupied. So the others are in a waiting position. And we have, Central Europe is densely populated, also in the mountains. There's lots of villages and small towns. So there's a lot of food for them. Therefore, also the young birds or non-breeders in winter, they don't die. They find enough food from humans. And it's like in Central Europe, they use mainly human food. So anthropogenic food sources like garbage dumps, compost stations, waste treatment centers, and skiing huts. So it's funny, I have some birds, so I'm GPS tracking ravens in Austria since 2013, and I have tracks where the bird is really flying from one skiing area to the next one, checking out the skiing huts. But of course only as long as the season is open. When they close the season, they stay a few more days and then they head on to something else. Here, last example. This was an interesting bird which we caught behind the buffalo range on a dead bison in Lamar Valley. So this is like where it was captured. And we kind of assumed, well, this bird is probably staying there in the area, like in the core of the northern range. It did at the beginning for some days. And then it moved out. It had a stop over here. This is again the bison kill at Tower. It's the same day. And then it decided to move further out. First to Gardiner and then out to Paradise Valley, spent quite some time in Paradise Valley. And then suddenly, for some reason, it went north. Like here's Livingston, and further up to the north to this little town here, Hallerton. I checked today, it moved even another 20 miles further to the north. And this is like, for us, this is always puzzling. we don't know. Maybe this bird is from up there, and just once in his life, he did a trip down there. It was chapped and went the hell back. We don't know. It could be also a local bird from Lamar which just wants to disperse. So it's really surprising for us how far they go within a very short time. And this is like, I'm speaking here, so it was tagged on the 16th of November. So these are data since the 16th of November.
Does one gender disperse more than the other, or go further, or is there any?
Yeah, usually in most bird species this is the case, but in ravens we didn't find this so far. So from my data in Austria, also in France we have some data, I didn't see any difference.
But typically in birds, females disperse farther than males, and mammals it's the opposite.
And then I just briefly give you an idea of all the data we have at the moment. This will probably take a little bit to load. What's interesting about here, you really see literally a flyway from Canyon Village, Mud Volcano, up to Gardiner and back again. So we have several birds in the interior. Some of them we captured here in Gardiner. So quite a few of these birds we captured here, and they're going back and forth almost every day. So at the moment we have 17,000 GPS points from these birds, and every day we get about 1,000 new points. So at the moment we really have a nice sample of the area. So what are ravens doing in this area? And what we plan for the future, what is actually already ongoing, is anyway the wolf study and the mountain lion study. So there is some of these individuals are also GPS colored. Of course, I don't have the data from this year so far because this is still ongoing, but I just want to show you an example. So for example, this would be last year at this time of the year, the wolf tracks. And then we also have for the same area the mountain lion GPS tracks from the GPS colored individuals. So and this is our plan, to really overlay the different species. In addition to that, we also know, so there's the cluster groups which try to find all the wolf kills or many puma kills. So this is an example of 1 month kills in Yellowstone of last year. And we will get the data also for this year, and then we can really see whether our data fits to these animals. So do ravens follow some wolf packs, or how good are they in finding puma kills versus wolf kills? So we can really see how they interact between the species. And with this I will switch briefly to another, just two more slides. So this is 2 animations I would like to show you. This is kind of a summary of our study, what you're going to see. This is the map about satellite image of the national park. This would be 50 kilometers, which is 33 miles about this. And what you're going to see is first just one little point which starts moving. So this was the first raven tagged on the 22nd of October, and then you will see more and more colored points will add and move through the landscape. So it's really an animation from this 22nd of October of the data until yesterday. And you see how much they move. So the advantage of this animation is you see them at the same time. Before you just saw the overlaying, it could be the day before or after, but here you really see when and where individuals meet. And when it stops, like now briefly, it's at night. So at night they don't move. And you will see over time there's more and more individuals. So we started at Canyon Village, then we got 1 individual here, and then we started trapping more around Gardiner. And this is zoomed in, so these outside movements, obviously you can't see them here.
Are you super surprised by all the information that you're gathering in just the last 2 months?
It is partly, I mean, some of these things I know from Europe, but some, for example, these movements of the territorial birds, I was really surprised. I never expected that. And also overall, I would say they move more than in Central Europe. I think the density of anthropogenic food sources in Central Europe is higher. Yeah. And then I have another present animation. So I'm sure many of you already dreamed of flying like a raven through the park. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning. In this case, I could get the GPS position from this bird every 5 minutes. That means the GPS track gets very accurate. Let's go back. And this is actually a flight simulator. So usually people use this for paragliding, but I just threw the raven data in, and you will see how we call the bird Mud Volcano. It starts at Mud Volcano. This is Hayden Valley here. It moves through Hayden Valley in the morning. And it will soon arrive at Canyon. So it did a big loop through Hayden Valley, maybe looking for some food there and didn't find anything. This is Canyon here. And then it went off the road and just straight forward over the mountains. Anybody knows the name of this mountain? I don't. I think Washburn is more to the right, to the east.
Is that in,
This here is Mammoth here already.
yes, that,
And that's the final, like, getting to Gardiner, and then it went pretty straightforward to some gut piles from the hunters, which is like in this area here. And at the same day, it went back again. So it arrived, I think, at lunchtime again. And it actually only stayed for 2.5 hours, and then it went back.
So that 37 miles, how long did it take to go there?
Usually it takes this bird about an hour, 1.5 hours. So it's faster than if we go to Mud Volcano by car. But it's also a shortcut. Yeah, and with this, I want to thank many people from the national park. So especially Lauren is really often out with us. And then also I would like to thank Jim, for organizing this today, and also for staying. I stay downstairs here, and a lot of other help. And then also George was an incredible help, George and his family. He organized tons of carcasses, like rib cages, and we are allowed to trap and bill and Peggy hop his property. Probably tomorrow again, hopefully tomorrow again. As far as I heard, the ravens are there, as well as the rib cages. And yeah, we could stay. We spent about a week or even more at Lamar Buffalo Ranch. So thanks, Katie, for hosting us there. We could trap on different properties and private lands, and also even on the cut land. And for funding, I have to say, like, the biggest part of the funding is from the European Union. Then another big chunk was from the Max Planck Institute. Also the University of Constance, where I'm affiliated, added some money. So John got a nice National Geographic grant, and then also, like, he's affiliated to University of Washington. So you also see it's always, you need like a lot of funding resources. It's not so easy to get all this together. And yeah, and with this I want to thank you for attention, and I'm happy for questions. Yeah.
Early on you started talking about the teamwork between wolves and ravens, and this would say there isn't one because ravens are not staying with the wolf pack in all these travels. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, so far. And again, it might change as the season changes.
Yeah.
But we've had this discussion many times in the car, and wolves are kind of unreliable providers if you're a raven. Dumps are predictable. Hunter's pretty darn predictable up there this time of year. So wolves are the least predictable right now, and that might change in a month. I wouldn't be surprised. But I think Doug Smith initially, when we showed him the data last year, he goes, "This is, I didn't expect it, but he thought it was really hungry country," is what he called it, which I thought was a good term.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's really such hungry country. It's just big country, and these birds really take advantage of a large area. They know where the food is, and for them going 30 miles, it's not a big deal.
How are you gonna get your transponders back?
I won't. It's for the ravens. Eventually they might fall off, but it would take a long time. So it should stay there for years. So ideally with the solar panel, it can get data for years. We can maybe some individuals 7 years or so. And that's great for us because then we just need this bird to get a lot of data. We don't need to trap again and again every year. So in the past, when these tags were used with just a battery, it didn't last very long.
There's a trade-off. It's a good question. There's a trade-off. Do you make the tags so they fall off, or do you have to catch them? The chances of us catching them and removing them are pretty slim, but we have recaught some birds already. The problem is if you make them to fall off, they don't just fall off. They come undone, and then there's a loop hanging out there, and the bird can get its head under it, or it gets stuck on a branch. To me, that's a bigger risk than once they're carrying these packages. You'll see. I mean, they don't seem to alter their flight or anything. I mean, they're traveling 30 miles.
Right, but we're
each
gonna
way.
see these birds probably.
You're going to see them for a long time.
You know.
I hope.
But it's surprisingly well covered by the feathers. So the other day, there's one bird, a female, I captured at Lamar River Bridge, and she's often there at the pullouts. So 2 days ago, I could take pictures from 10 meters distance out of the car. And first I thought the solar panel is completely covered by feathers because the only thing I saw is this part of the antenna. But then once she turned and I saw really on the back, I could see the solar panel was not covered. But sometimes it's still a bit covered, and we see this in the recharge of the battery.
They do have colored leg bands, individually distinct leg bands as well, and you'll see those for years.
So you have all kinds of other corvids and jays and stuff all over the place here. And I think they're co-resident with crows in some places. Why ravens and not crows, or why, magpies are all, the magpies follow the ravens, or, there's a lot.
Oh, I think,
with all these guys.
I almost think sometimes the ravens follow the magpies. Because when we put out bait, usually the first ones are the magpies. And it's incredible. Sometimes, usually we start in the dark. So we set up the trap and the bait in the dark. And we had, many times it was the case, the sun came, so light came, and the magpies are beelining in as if they would know where the food is. They just find it. And I think, to me, magpies are pretty obvious. It's easy to see. So I wouldn't be surprised if ravens also use this. Like, oh, there's some magpies, there's probably some food, let's check it out.
We've studied the other I've studied other corvids, other places, and it'd be great to study them all here. Yeah. Even pinion jays in Gardiner, be great. But there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, and one advantage, a big advantage with the ravens is they're large. Yeah. So I can't put this tag on a magpie. It's not heavy. The whole thing has 35 grams. So it's really optimized to decrease the weight as much as possible. But for a magpie, it would be too much. There is tags for magpies. The size, it's possible. But then we get much less data. So it's kind of, every year it gets smaller. There's smaller batteries available. In a few years, like for some of the species, it's often the case, like if you wait a few years, 5 years, you have the right size, and then you can go for it.
Ruling out your Instagram theory earlier, and some of these were known sites that are predictable, trash dumps, sewer, etc. There was a lot of these that looked like they were heading with a purpose to a kill.
Yeah.
30 miles, etc. What is your sense of which senses are they relying on? How are they getting the information that quickly and getting down there?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that we talk about all the time. I think it's more local knowledge. One, they know to go to Jardine in the hunting season in that area because there will be food up there, so they can beeline it there. But in terms of like coming to a wolf kill, the bird from Cook City, there's a lot of noise associated with the kill, the birds that are there. There are cars driving to go in and watch the kill. There are ravens flying. There are eagles coming in. There's lots of signals that something of interest is here. And if you're a bird and you're hungry, you get up in the air, and I think a lot of that information is able to be perceived visually and vocally.
How about sense of smell?
Ravens don't have a good sense of smell. Magpies do have a good sense, and that's why they get in on kills early, and they get on puma kills more than ravens do. But yeah, I think it's mostly sight and sound. But the extent, the channels they're using in those senses, I think it's probably a lot more than we would have thought.
But to your point, visual range extends very quickly if you go up. So
Yeah.
they're just getting up and surveying.
I think they can see a huge area, and they notice activity, and if you're hungry, you go to activity, and boom, you're there.
And what I can imagine is that sometimes they might go up higher and see another raven flying in a specific direction, not just like randomly around, just like really beelining somewhere. And maybe this is already triggering, like, well, if I don't know anything better to do, just try it and let's follow this raven. And this could be, in theory, even several ravens in a row.
How good is their eyesight? You hear, like eagles, 8x binoculars. Or, you know, do ravens have?
It shouldn't be as good as eagles because their eyes aren't as big. It's a physical function of eye size and position, and eagles' eyes are more binocular and bigger. So they should be able to take in more light and see better at a longer distance. But ravens are still pretty darn good. It's a big eye. And we were talking about this. There was a guy who did some of this work in Berlin many years ago. I forget, but we'll find it, and he had some comparisons in there. But it's less, but it's more. It's certainly better than a lot of smaller birds, with respect to comparing it to eagles.
How many days worth of data can the little backpacks hold if they don't have a chance to download?
Good question.
We're worried about that question.
According to the manufacturer, months with our current settings. We could, like, in summer, under ideal conditions, we can take data on up to every second. Then, of course, not so long. But at the moment, as I said, every half an hour we have now, I think, from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening. So we also nicely get the positions of the naturalists. It would be months.
And that you can reprogram remotely
Yeah.
if you want to? Interesting.
It needs to connect to the cell network. Then the new settings get uploaded. Alternatively, I need to find the bird and need to connect my laptop to the base station, and then I can reprogram as well.
You come back in the wintertime and snowmobile the canyon, you can talk to your bird.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be up in the tree looking for you.
Yeah.
Well, and I know which snowmobile manufacturers have the Velcro on the back for
Yeah.
The easier ones to open. Yeah.
Going
Yeah.
in,
Right to those.
taking out packs of potatoes.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, super smart.
Yeah.
They're just sitting in trees and wait, you know.
And it's really surprising for us. We had this, that we found birds. Well, one bird you captured last March at the dump. Then we almost recaptured it at Canyon Village. And then recently we saw the birds 2 times again, like at the dump and once at the sewage pond. So it's really nice to see the same individual so far apart.
Can you talk a little bit about the bird at the Yellowstone picnic area? Because we do see that one a lot. It's kind of a common buddy.
Well, the first one is what you captured.
Yeah.
So
The first bird, that was the bird we captured in March, last March. And we call him Cheddar because he was caught on cheese. But yeah, that bird, I mean, hangs out there all the time. His home range, if you looked at, would be like that one from the cut lands, just very tight area. We noticed this summer when we were doing a class at YF that his mate was banded. And that was one banded by Brian Bedrosian in Jackson 13 years ago. Matthias just recaught her a few weeks ago, and now we have a GPS tag on her. So, and she was caught on pizza, so we got cheddar and pizza living there.
So are the juveniles the ones with the red?
The juveniles have red inside their mouth,
The
and
ones at picnic are teaching their children.
they had 3 kids who stayed right there at the picnic area with them and learned the bad habits of the mom and dad.
Yeah, and you sort of can't get rid of them. I mean, you know, you can.
Well, they're gone. Those juveniles are gone now.
Yeah.
Somebody else's picnic area, somebody else's park to worry about. Yeah, we've done, I mean, in our trapping, we use food that's appropriate for the area where they're eating. So that's why we use those foods there. But in doing that, we've also, we're hoping that we're training these birds not to take those kind of foods. And indeed, when we tried to recatch them, it was very difficult. And we still have it. We'd like to recatch the male and change his transmitter. And we haven't been able to yet. They don't, at least when we come into that picnic area, they're not down by us anymore. So I know they are with other people, but I think it's less. In fact, they haven't really been there much at all the last month almost. Exactly. So their behavior is changing. It's adjusted to what people are doing there. Hopefully we correct it a little bit in our aversive conditioning when we catch them and tag them. But they are, I think it's, again, it's a trade-off. That's an interesting bird. A lot of people see it. I get reports all the time that people have seen this bird and photographed it, and hopefully that engenders some interest in the bird and some compassion for the wildlife like that.
It was putting on quite a show, and it wasn't going to get anything from us.
Yeah,
but
it was working you though. Yeah.
Do they mate for life?
They do mate for life, but like that example from Washington, when they lose a mate, they remate right away. It's not like they're done.
Do you think they recognize you?
Yeah. Yeah, they recognize our car. I can tell you that. So we're switching cars all the time. And they recognize the Ford or the Ram pickup now that the park uses, and I'm sure they recognize us. And they recognize all kinds of things that we do, like how we put the trap and where we put it, and if we're sitting watching them, if we're looking at them, they pay a lot of attention to our activities. Because other people come in and they're like right there, but
people usually don't see the trap, but the ravens do.
Yeah.
What about the nets? Do you think they recognize or are starting to recognize the nets being next to a carcass eventually?
Yeah, I mean, we hide it. We cover it with grass and netting, camo netting, and we try to make it look as part of the landscape as possible. But yes, they see a hump, which is the profile of the gun. And I mean, we sat all day today from dark until 3 watching ravens stay away from the thing that they had eaten yesterday. Yeah.
And this is what we do most of the time.
Most of the days. Yeah.
But then you had one really big day, right? Where you got
Yeah, we had one big day. And yeah, John was not here and Lauren was not here, but luckily George and Jenny, they could help, and Shanna, and we got 20 birds. So it was actually 22 under the net. One escaped itself. Another one escaped in this stress in getting them out, getting them into bags. So one managed to get out of the bag, but I was happy with that because 20 is really a lot. So we managed to color band all of them, and I could put GPS tags on 11 on that day. But that means we were processing birds from 9 to 3 continuously, non-stop. And then I wouldn't want to keep them longer because they just had a little breakfast, maybe not even that. And then you don't want to keep them the whole day. You release them and they can continue foraging.
Are you following the breeding pair that nests at Golden Gate at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried.
Dreams. Yeah, we tried to catch that bird. We shot the net over the top of that bird.
When you say that bird, you mean the
The-
male or the female?
I think it was the female,
Yeah.
is what we think there. We've only seen one bird. We know there's a nest right across, and there's obviously a pair, but every time we go to trap, there's only one bird there.
Yeah.
And she does not like us.
Oh, because because boy, they beg like crazy, but they know people really well.
Well, the first time she did that, came right up to us, and we shot the net, and it went right over the top of her, and she just stood there and got
I
away.
think now she knows us.
Yeah.
What about, I mean, aren't they spending most of their time, it seems like at least during, I watched that nest a lot, it seems like they go to get food more often south than north, although sometimes, but.
We see them at those pull-offs just a little bit south by
Yeah.
Bunsen, but we don't know. Without tagging them, we don't know.
And how do you sex them?
Males are larger than females, but again, it's difficult unless you really kind of see them side by side in the field. But when you have them in your hand, a male will typically weigh 1,200 grams and a female 1,000. So there's quite a difference, and they're just more robust beak, beard on the males, thicker legs, but it's hard. And we're also taking blood, and we'll do the genetics to find out for sure.
Do these birds give any territory to some of their young within them? No.
No, they hate their young after a month. They chase them out, and they would kill them if they could get them. Yeah, they were very aggressive. Once that month of, they got, you got a month, and that's it, guys, you're gone. Get going. So.
Did you say, and I just missed, how many in the GYE you have tagged?
So far? 49.
So 49?
Yeah, 49.
49 with the GPS tags,
Yeah.
and I don't know, another 15 with color bands.
Did you say the cost on those GPS tags?
Very high. Yeah, one GPS tag is almost $2,000. So I was really lucky that Martin Wikelski, his director of this Max Planck Institute, I could convince him that this is a cool project. And yeah, I got quite some money from him. So it was not covered. I got from the EU a big part of the money, but then we needed much more. Originally, we planned to use a different system, which is developed by this department. It's called Icarus. This is planned for nutcrackers in a park. So as far as I know, next year they want to tag up to 50 nutcrackers with this system. But when I wanted to use them, so for now, it still doesn't work. So there were some delays. The thing is they installed an antenna on the International Space Station on the Russian part, and the Russians were not always so easy with everything. So once it was installed, they wanted to talk again about everything. Probably they just wanted more money. And so there was a lot of delays, so we needed a different system, which was much more expensive. But he was especially convinced by the possibilities here that we already have several species tracked. So there's the wolves, there's the pumas, there's elk, there's several
Golden
other
eagles.
ungulate species.
Golden
eagles. So this is a really nice setting, and there's hardly any, or I think there is no place in the world at the moment where we have so many different species in the same area with GPS tags. So we can really, for the first time, we can really look across species. How are they interacting?
So you guys have 49 birds with GPS. How many are you looking to get, or how many do you have the funding to get?
60. So I brought 60 of these tags.
These ravens all seem to be doing pretty well for themselves, but do you know if they ever go long periods of time without eating at all?
Yeah, I mean, they can go weeks without eating. I don't know that any of ours, we haven't seen that, but you do occasionally see ravens that can't fly. And they've lost all the muscle mass in their pectoralis that they use for flying. And that they basically catabolize that protein, and to the point where they can't fly, but if they eat, they rebuild it and they can fly again. So they have an interesting storage strategy, not fat, but muscle, basically. But they can go a long time, and you would expect a scavenger, there are going to be some good days and bad days, especially if you're a subordinate. There's going to be a lot of days where you might just get a mouthful. And that's it.
Well, tonight's star actor of the program is obviously the Ravens. The award for supporting actors goes to John and Matthias. One to introduce one other supporting actor. Well, not supporting actor. Let's start with the actor himself, the Golden Eagle. And we have a supporting actor that you might also enjoy visiting with tonight when we break up. Dave Haynes is here from the University of Montana, the Wildlife Department. Dave is currently, he's got his radios over here, tagging eagles, golden eagles, right? All on golden eagles. So take some time to visit with Dave also, and certainly want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is one of the top well-attended ones, thanks to Ravens, I guess. And after it clears out a little while, somebody give me a little help. She usually do. We'll move some chairs back. But feel free to stay and visit, and thank you.
Yeah.